Imagine you can't watch any movie or TV show or listen to any music that government officials think is inappropriate. If you have an interest in any of those things, then you have an interest in freedom of speech. And I think we too often take for granted the strong legal protections for free speech in this country that many other nations lack. And even the United States, despite the First Amendment, has a long and dismal history of censorship. While the First Amendment was ratified in 1791, the Supreme Court didn't even begin to breathe life into it until the 1920s. And the last century of First Amendment jurisprudence is really a story of people speaking out on public issues, often at great personal risk, and whose willingness to fight back against government persecution made everyone else's freedom more secure. Of course, censorship is still with us today, but thanks to the First Amendment, we can generally criticize the government, advocate for social or political change, create art and literature, tell jokes, and generally speak our minds without worrying about being fined or ending up in prison or even worse. But let's transport ourselves back to 1835. The American Anti-Slavery Society is planning a massive mailing campaign to flood the South with abolitionist literature. They print tens of thousands of pamphlets a week to mail to politicians, ministers, and newspaper editors in the South. Supporters of slavery in the southern states, unsurprisingly, not thrilled with this attempt to weaken support for the so-called peculiar institution. In fact, it caused mass outrage and hysteria. In Charleston, South Carolina, for instance, 3,000 people raided the local post office, seizing and destroying anti-slavery materials and burning 3 abolitionists in effigy. As the slavery question garnered more national attention, it not only became taboo to criticize slavery in the South, it put your life at risk. So you could be put to death just for circulating pamphlets calling for emancipation. It was even a crime in many states to teach slaves how to read. Around the same time, petitions start pouring into Congress calling for abolition. Congress responds by passing a gag rule that prohibits any discussion and debate on anti-slavery petitions. These actions of slavery supporters showed that they knew the power of speech, and they knew how devastating a fair competition in the marketplace of ideas would be to their justifications for enslaving human beings. Frederick Douglass knew this. It's no coincidence that Douglass, a leader of the abolitionist movement and one of the most incisive critics of slavery, was also a staunch supporter of free speech. On December 3rd, 1860, months before the outbreak of the Civil War, Douglass and a group of fellow abolitionists met at a church in Boston. That meeting was quickly broken up by a violent pro-slavery mob. But that didn't stop Douglass from giving a speech just 6 days later that is widely regarded as one of the most eloquent and enduring defenses of free speech in American history. He called free speech the great moral renovator of society and the dread of tyrants. Because if you're a tyrant, the last thing you want is a bunch of people talking about what a tyrant you are. That's why, as Douglass pointed out, free speech is the first right that authoritarian leaders strike down when they come to power. He said, "Slavery cannot tolerate free speech. 5 years of its exercise would banish the auction block and break every chain in the South." I think what Douglass said back then is no less true in the present day or any other time in history. Oppressive governments and unjust social institutions become unstable when people are free to criticize them. Without free speech, the powerful are able to insulate themselves and their ideas from criticism. Now fast forward about 60 years. The muckraking journalist Upton Sinclair appears at a rally in San Pedro, California, in support of longshoremen who were facing police harassment for organizing a strike. The police had banned public meetings, so the rally took place on private land with the owner's consent, a piece of property that the workers dubbed Liberty Hill. But when Sinclair began to read from the Bill of Rights, of all things, the police arrested him along with hundreds of others. And one officer even told Sinclair to, quote, "cut out that Constitution stuff." During the civil rights movement, Southern governments used every trick in the book to try to stop civil rights activists from reaching the public with their message. But those activists would secure several crucial First Amendment victories at the Supreme Court, which helped them continue to use their voices to shift public opinion on racial equality. For example, in 1961, nearly 200 black students marched from a church to the State House in Columbia, South Carolina. Along the way, they sang religious hymns and carried signs that read, "Down with segregation." Though the march was peaceful, the police arrested the demonstrators for breach of the peace. That case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, which reversed the convictions. The court wrote that the First Amendment restrains the government from punishing the peaceful expression of unpopular views. Former Congressman and civil rights activist John Lewis once said that without freedom of speech and the right to dissent, the civil rights movement would have been a bird without wings. And I would argue that's equally true of any movement for equal rights. Without free speech, we would have to rely on those in power to resist the temptation to stifle criticism and ideas that challenge the established order. And history shows that they're not so great at doing that. That's why I'm concerned when I occasionally hear the argument today that free speech is actually a tool of oppression. I think that gets it exactly backwards. The people who need free speech more than anyone are the powerless and the marginalized. If you lack political power, you still at least retain your voice. And any restrictions on speech are necessarily going to be established and enforced by those with political power. And the odds are they're not going to use that power to censor themselves or their allies, but rather to censor speech that they don't like. Whenever we talk about censorship, it's important to remember you can't have censorship without a censor. Someone has to enforce that speech code. So when I think when people call for restrictions on speech for some seemingly beneficial reason, they often assume those restrictions will be enforced the way they intended. But the fact is that often isn't the case, or it might only be the case in the short term. Sacrificing civil liberties for short-term political gains is an unwise strategy. Former ACLU director Ira Glasser likens censorship to poison gas. It's a powerful and effective weapon to use on your enemy until the wind shifts in your direction. Now, it's reasonable to ask, why protect even certain types of speech that are deemed harmful? Why protect, for example, hate speech? Why should we tolerate words and ideas that deeply offend people or might convince others to adopt hateful beliefs or ideologies? I won't sit here and deny that speech can inflict pain or persuade people to accept bad ideas. Having talked about the power of free speech for good, it would be dishonest of me to suggest that it can't lead to bad outcomes too. But one important point here is that, as that quiz before my talk showed, the First Amendment doesn't protect all speech. So there are a few narrow and precisely defined exceptions to the First Amendment, which means that there could be some circumstances in which speech deemed hateful or offensive could lose constitutional protection. And one of the examples in the quiz was true threats, right? So if you communicate a serious expression of intent to inflict bodily harm on another individual, that speech is not protected. Another First Amendment exception is incitement. Incitement is speech intended to and likely to cause immediate unlawful action or violence. So if I rile up a mob carrying torches outside your house and calling them to burn it down, the First Amendment won't protect me. I can't say, Your Honor, I was merely participating in the marketplace of ideas. No, there was an imminent concrete danger of physical harm that the government had the authority to intervene to prevent or punish. In other words, there was no time for discussion or debate, which is the preferred method of working out our differences of opinion. There's a famous quote on this from Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who wrote, "If there be time to expose through discussion the falsehood and fallacies, to avert the evil by the processes of education, the remedy to be applied is more speech, not enforced silence. Only an emergency can justify repression." So we have these limited exceptions to the First Amendment, but the pure expression of a viewpoint or belief is always protected, even if some deem it hateful or offensive. Now, why is that? Well, for one thing, hate speech is difficult, I would argue impossible, to define in a principled and objective way. And that's because the concept of hate, the concept of offense, is inherently vague and subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder. One person's hate speech is another's legitimate political advocacy. And again, who would be in charge of deciding what qualifies as hate speech? It's whoever happens to be in power at a given time. And because hate and offense are such elastic, subjective concepts, it's very easy for those enforcing restrictions on this type of speech to smuggle in their own biases and to selectively target viewpoints that they or the majority disagree with. Joe Biden and Donald Trump are going to have very different ideas about what constitutes hate speech. Maybe you'd be okay with one administration's definition, but what about the next one? Or you can take the ongoing debate over the Israel-Hamas war. Over the past few months, there have been many examples of people on each side accusing the other of bigotry and even genocidal rhetoric. But the people, sorry, there's a fly in here, but the people on the receiving end of those accusations say that they're simply calling for justice, or they're criticizing Israeli government policy, or they're asserting Israel's right to defend itself. So it's very easy to see how a hate speech prohibition could be enforced against both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian speech, depending on the views and biases of the censor. And FIRE, my organization, has in fact had many cases over the past few months involving punishment of students and faculty for their speech on this issue. Speech that doesn't amount to true threats, doesn't amount to incitement, doesn't cross the line into harassment, but that simply stifles political debate. The restrictions stifle political debate. Now, I'm not denying that speech can cause psychological pain. It can cause discomfort. But if we let people's subjective reactions to speech determine whether that speech is allowed, there won't be much left to say at all. And especially, in these very heated political discussions. And it's not just that, it's not even just straight up insults and ridicule that can cause psychological discomfort. I mean, even an academic discussion can be just as distressing to some listeners. Think of a classroom discussion about the horrors of slavery. Or imagine an atheist makes an argument against the existence of God that causes a devout believer to have a crisis of faith that turns into a spiraling depression. Does that mean that that speech should be punishable? And then who decides what speech is sufficiently hurtful to justify censorship and punishment? Do we do it based on how badly the victim was hurt or offended? And then how do we measure that? It doesn't matter if the speech said something true. It doesn't matter if the speaker was joking. At the end of the day, we all have a unique blend of beliefs, biases, and sensitivities shaped by our own genes and life histories, which in turns mean we all have somewhat different ideas about what speech is beyond the pale. And trying to accommodate that through the law or through university policy is really a project doomed to failure. And it would eliminate what the Supreme Court has called the robust, uninhibited, and wide open discussion of public affairs that's fundamental to democratic self-government. Now, another argument for restricting hate speech is that it may ultimately inspire others to commit terrible acts. As I explained earlier, there's already an exception to the First Amendment for speech that incites immediate violence. Okay, so there is that protection in place. But if we start to loosen that standard so that it reaches speech that may at some point inspire violence or influence people to adopt harmful beliefs, we're again inviting authorities to crack down on a wide range of expression. We've been through this before. In the early 1900s, before the Supreme Court would interpret the First Amendment to be as speech protective as it is today, it used the so-called bad tendency test to, among other things, uphold the convictions of people who spoke out against U.S. involvement in World War I. And the logic there was that their advocacy might encourage people to resist the draft, which would in turn undermine the war effort and in turn undermine our national security. Even Martin Luther King, who famously called for nonviolent resistance, was accused of inciting riots and violence. At one point, the FBI called him the most dangerous person in the country. Now, fast forward to today, someone on the left might say that arguing that trans women shouldn't be able to compete in women's sports incites hatred against trans people, whereas someone on the right might say that using the phrase "all cops are bastards" incites violence against police officers. Our political conversation is full of passionate advocacy on polarizing issues, and if we let the government, including public universities, censor speech because it might cause someone somewhere at some time to do something bad, then we give the government the power a very broad power to manipulate public discourse and shut down views that it disagrees with. On top of all that, there's also no evidence that trying to suppress hate speech is actually effective at reducing hate. In fact, there's evidence that racist and anti-Semitic attitudes have increased in European countries since they passed hate speech laws. Countries like Germany and the United Kingdom have a higher incidence of hate crimes than the United States, despite having such laws. Now, how could that happen? Well, when you ban speech, you don't make the sentiment behind it go away, but you do isolate speakers and make them more likely to talk only to people that they already agree with. And there's actually research showing that when people are isolated in politically homogenous groups, they become more radicalized in their beliefs. Now, you might think that maybe the First Amendment served a useful purpose decades ago, but now it's outdated. But I would say that couldn't be further from the truth. If you're on the political left, for example, you might be upset by what you see happening today in some red states, whether it's banning library books, restricting drag performances, suppressing protest, or limiting the academic freedom of so-called woke professors. Well, a federal court in Texas recently ordered books to be returned to a public library after they were banned as inappropriate, including LGBT books and historical books about the KKK. A Trump-appointed judge in Tennessee issued a temporary restraining order against a law targeting public drag shows. A federal judge in Mississippi blocked a state law that required written approval from state officials just to protest on sidewalks outside government buildings. And that law was passed after recent protests on issues such as voting rights, poverty, and the city of Jackson's clean water crisis. And I'll give one more example. Fire sued Florida and successfully stopped enforcement of the Stop Woke Act, which banned professors from expressing certain views about race or sex in the classroom and would effectively ban them from presenting, for example, presenting arguments in favor of affirmative action. Now, the First Amendment is, of course, nonpartisan and protects speakers on the right, too. And there have been some notable recent court victories in favor of conservatives who have been shut down from speaking during public comment period of school board or city council meetings. And there was a selective prosecution claim against, brought by pro-life activists for chalking, they were prosecuted for chalking on DC sidewalks, whereas many Black Lives Matter activists were allowed to do so without any sort of police involvement or prosecution. Now, none of these court victories would have been possible without the First Amendment. And we should really celebrate all First Amendment victories, no matter the views of the speaker in a specific case or where your views fall on the political spectrum, because a win ultimately protects the right of each of us to speak freely. The best weapon you have against speech you disagree with is counterspeech, using your own voice. The moment you grant that people who spread hate or harmful ideologies can influence others' views and behavior, you've accepted the power of speech. But that power runs both ways. Speech also has the power to persuade people to reject bad ideas. And that's happened again and again in this country's history. I think even with all the problems our society still has today, it's certainly a more tolerant place than it was 100 years ago. Now, I've talked a lot about the First Amendment, but free speech is an older concept than the First Amendment. It's not just a legal protection. It's also a cultural value that entails a set of norms that support people's right to speak, right and ability to speak freely and speak their minds. In a healthy free speech culture, when we hear speech we don't like, our first instinct isn't to silence or deplatform the speaker, which won't make their ideas magically disappear. It's to respond with more speech. It's a free speech culture that there's a willingness to listen to and engage in dialogue and not be so quick to dismiss those with different views. So I would encourage all of you to do what you can to foster a culture of free speech and dialogue on campus. And one way you can do that is to join a civil discourse club or create one if none exists. And FIRE has resources to help with this. The purpose is to create a space where students can discuss even controversial topics in a productive manner. There can still be strong disagreement, but it should be a space where students can openly and honestly express their views without being subject to ridicule or ostracization. Now, people may or may not change their minds, but the goal is to increase mutual understanding. And you might change someone's mind, or maybe have your own mind changed, or at a bare minimum, at least learn something from others' perspectives. John Stuart Mill was a political philosopher who wrote the essay On Liberty, one of the most passionate defenses of free speech ever written. And my boss, Fire President Greg Lukianoff, coined the term Mill's trident for Mill's observation that in any debate, there are only three possibilities. You're wrong, you're partially wrong, or you're entirely correct. But in each case, you benefit from free speech and hearing others' arguments and perspectives. If you're wrong, free speech allows others to correct you. If you're partially correct, free speech and hearing others' views allows you to refine your position and develop a more precise understanding of an issue. And then even in the unlikely event that you are 100% correct, you still benefit from hearing contrary views and understanding the arguments against your position. Because if you never have to defend your views, there's a good chance you don't really understand why they're actually correct or why you hold them, but instead you hold those views the same way you would hold a prejudice or superstition. And as a practical matter, you're unlikely to be a very effective or persuasive advocate for your views if you never have to defend them. I'll just end with a quick story about two former fire interns, Bobby and Dylan, who started a civil discourse group at the College of Worcester because they felt that the environment there didn't foster the free exchange of ideas. Instead, students were siloed off from each other along political lines, and many self-censored their opinions out of fear for how their peers would react. Fire's own research shows that this sort of self-censorship is pervasive on many college campuses. So I talked earlier about how censoring hate speech can isolate people into groups with other censored speakers and cause them to become more extreme. The same type of phenomenon can happen when people self-isolate into echo chambers on campus and stop talking to each other. They tend to become more uncompromising in their beliefs, and polarization gets worse. So Bobby and Dylan created this space where students of varying beliefs could come together and talk openly with each other about difficult issues. And their first topic, sure enough, was, should there be limits on free speech? The conversation did get a little heated. Some students got angry, and Bobby remembered thinking, where the conversation was going, I just thought there's no way people are going to walk out of here and just never want to see each other again. But to his surprise, students actually stayed behind after the meeting to continue talking with each other. They realized that it was possible to productively engage with people with different opinions on contentious issues. And they didn't shield themselves from words and ideas for fear that simply hearing them would cause harm. They confronted those ideas and found that empowering. Did they all come out of the meeting agreeing with each other and singing Kumbaya? No. But as Dylan recalled, at the end of the meeting, there was a genuine shared understanding of others' views. I feel like people left with more empathy for others, and that was a shared, genuine experience. So I think if we had a little more of that on our college campuses, it would go a long way. And with that, I will stop talking and open it up to any questions people might have.
Yeah, my question is really, are there any examples that you can give for like what you can't do, if that makes sense? Just like as an example for people in the room to kind of build something off of.
I'm just going to repeat the question to make sure I heard it correctly. You're asking for examples of the type of speech that you can engage in?
Cannot.
So yeah, I touched on a couple examples of speech that's not protected at the First Amendment. And by the way, because your university is a public university, the First Amendment does apply. Public universities are government actors. So I mentioned true threats. So threatening somebody in a serious manner with bodily harm or death, you can't do that. Most people, I mean, that probably aligns with most people's intuitions. I think that's not protected speech. I mentioned incitement and gave the example of like you rile up a mob right out someone's house and like calling on them to set it on fire. But it's a very high standard. So you have to, the speech that you're engaging in has to be intended to cause immediate violence or some sort of unlawful action, and it has to be actually likely to result in that. Um, so if you were like saying something intended to cause violence, but you were just like emailing it to one person who wasn't going to do anything, that wouldn't amount to incitement. And this has come up a little bit, like I don't know if this is happening on your campus, but on campuses around the country, there have been a lot of protests, particularly pro-Palestinian protests in response to Israel's military operation in Gaza. And some people have argued that that's crossed the line over into incitement. Um, but none of the examples I've seen I think, have met that bar. Just a group of students walking across the quad and chanting something like, there are these controversial expressions like "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Um, that alone is not going to be enough. Uh, without you need something more than just that to constitute incitement. That in and of itself is going to be protected political advocacy. Now, let's rearrange the facts where that group is like menacingly marching towards a particular student, and maybe in that circumstance it does rise to the level of incitement or harassment. But you would need something like that sort of targeted conduct in order for that exception to apply. Um, and there are other exceptions to the First Amendment. You can't defame an individual. So the First Amendment does protect false speech, but if you make a false statement about an individual that you know to be false and that causes damage to their reputation, then you could potentially be liable for defamation in that instance. And then there's some other exceptions that the average person is probably not going to need to worry about about their speech falling into it. Like obscenity is one, but obscenity is like it's talking about really like hardcore sexual conduct that is like completely out of bounds of what society deems acceptable. It's a very rarely invoked exception, and even porn that you find on the internet doesn't fall into that exception typically because, well, a lot of people watch porn and it's not really considered like obscene in that sense. Like there's another prong to that test where the expression at issue like has to lack any serious artistic, literary, political, or scientific value. So if anyone could find like value in a book that other people find obscene, then it's going to still be protected by the First Amendment. But other than that, like other than those exceptions, I would say threats, harassment. Oh, and then like let me talk about harassment real quick. So the standard for discriminatory harassment in the context of higher education it's really about conduct, not speech per se, although speech can be part of a pattern of conduct that rises to the level of harassment. But the standard for discriminatory harassment is speech that is unwelcome, targeted at an individual on the basis of a protected characteristic like their race or sex. And that is so severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive that it effectively deprives that person from receiving the educational opportunities and benefits that other students are able to receive. So, generally like a one-off comment that offends somebody, that's not going to amount to harassment. But if you repeatedly saying things to an individual, saying things that are discriminating towards them based on their race or sex, and they've clearly like made clear to you that they do not want to receive these communications, and you continue to do it, like at some point that easily could rise to the level of harassment that the school not only could punish, but would have an obligation to address under federal law.
Thanks for being here. My name's Sam. I actually serve as the Dean of Students, and one of the questions I get a lot is what are the differences that you see between public and private institutions? Because I think that there are times when students look at private institutions and say, see, they're addressing it this way over here, why can't you do that? So I'd love for you to speak on the differences that you see, if any.
Right. So public universities, because they are government institutions, are bound by the First Amendment. Private institutions, private colleges and universities are not bound by the First Amendment. However, they are often targets of our advocacy when they restrict student or faculty speech because many private colleges and institutions, although they don't have to legally abide by First Amendment standards, they often voluntarily commit to protecting the free speech and academic freedom of students and faculty. And that's because they recognize that colleges are supposed to be a place where people are free to discuss and explore different ideas and views without having their speech suppressed by an administrative authority. It just kind of goes against the whole basic purpose of a university of producing and disseminating knowledge. For that, you need kind of wide open space for people to discuss different ideas, even if it sometimes might cause people discomfort or offense. But some institutions, there are some institutions that don't make those commitments, and we call them warning schools, which basically which is a way of just informing prospective students that just know that if you attend this school, your free speech will not be protected. You can be punished for your speech. And this is, for instance, true at some religious universities because they choose to place other values, like their religious values, above a commitment to free expression. And that is, that's their own freedom of association as a private institution that make that type of choice. But if you're, and students can choose to attend an institution like that, but they should know that they're not going to have the same freedom that they have at other institutions to freely discuss their views and ideas. But if you're a private institution, like most of them, that makes those commitments, then our argument is then you should stick to them. You should not frustrate student expectations who came to the school that makes these commitments. And so even though you may not be bound by the First Amendment, you still have a moral obligation and duty as an institution that makes these commitments to stick to them. And in some cases, there may actually even be a legal claim against those institutions for restricting speech under a theory like breach of contract, or some states that might have, like California, for instance, has something called the Leonard Law, which basically applies the First Amendment to private institutions within that state, so that you have the private students at private institutions do have the same free speech rights that they would at, say, Berkeley. So I think the bottom line, whether you're a private or a public institution, it's beneficial to have that commitment to free expression and academic freedom, and it's ultimately, I think, in all students and faculty members' interests.
I wanted to ask how you would address kind of the perception from students and everybody, I guess, the difference between like de jure and de facto enforcement of free speech, because I feel like a lot of our students see, even if the protesters cannot be legally broken up, the police break them up and then the police get, slapped on the wrist by the law, that the protest still was broken up and the message still didn't get out. And so I think that they get like frustrated seeing that happen on the news and then hearing that like that same kind of, even if it's unlawful, even that like unlawful action can't be applied to the opposite side. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about like how we can address that frustration and how we can clarify like what the difference is in a way that our students are going to be able to embrace, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I share that frustration. I think that when government actors, government officials violate people's constitutional rights, they should be held accountable. And in many cases, to be clear, in many cases they are. And particularly institutions like public universities have lost many First Amendment lawsuits, some that fire has brought. So we have been able to effectively hold a lot of these institutions. And now that we've expanded our mission off campus, many other government actors accountable in the court of law for violating people's rights. But you're absolutely right that there are many cases, unfortunately, where government officials, including police officers, will not be personally held liable for their actions. And a lot of that has to do with a doctrine in the law called qualified immunity, which I'm not a big fan of. But that the doctrine essentially says that you can only hold an individual government official responsible for violating someone's First Amendment rights or other constitutional rights if you can show that the right in question, specifically the right in question and under the circumstances, was clearly established, which means that it basically means that there already has to be like a court decision on very similar facts that establish that what the official did in those circumstances violated the First Amendment. And it's frustrating because a lot of times courts will say this government official is entitled to qualified immunity because there isn't like a previous case that's basically like right on point, right on all fours with this case. But there's a lot of law, established law, First Amendment law, that is clearly established at this point. So if the police were really to do something really just blatantly unconstitutional, like, you know, people are protesting, there's no hint that they're engaged in any unlawful activity. They're just, you know, they're not, you know, unlawfully protesting without a permit or something, and they're just spreading their political message. And the police come in there and start, you know, physically committing physical violence and dragging them away. If those protesters bring a lawsuit against the police in that circumstances, I think that they have a good chance of succeeding. But you are going to have many other circumstances where, I mean, you know, granted, some people may not want to always go through the time and hassle of bringing a lawsuit. It can be a stressful and time consuming and expensive thing. And you are going to have other situations where it's kind of closer to the line. And even though it's just, there's no question that the conduct was unconstitutional, qualified immunity might apply. So I just hope, you know, there's actually a big movement by First Amendment advocates and Fourth Amendment advocates and other constitutional lawyers to abolish, if not abolish qualified immunity, then at least reform it so that it makes it less difficult to bring these sorts of claims against public officials when they violate people's constitutional rights. But in the meantime, I think, you know, we still want to have as the strongest First Amendment protections possible that are in place, and that will still to some extent deter these sorts of abuses by public officials.
Hi, my name is Melanie. I work in housing and residential life, and unfortunately, in the course of any given year, it's not uncommon for us to experience slurs or other hateful language written on whiteboards outside students' doors, on bulletin boards, etc. And so in communicating with students, where do you see that fitting into this conversation?
Yeah, and look, you know, I think you have to acknowledge, right, that it's tough for many people to see or hear that type of language, to views that they find hateful. And even if some of it's, you know, kind of in a joking or trolling manner, that doesn't mean that people aren't going to be negatively affected by it. Now, what I would say though is that the response to that the proper response to that isn't to punish students for the mere expression of an offensive viewpoint or speech, unless it is, you know, rising to the level of a threat or harassment of another student or some other form of protected speech. But if it's not rising to that level, then I think the right response is counter speech. I mean, for people to use their own voices to criticize speech that they think is wrong or offensive. And, you know, you could try to engage with people or you can choose to ignore it. But if we start to expand restrictions on speech beyond these very limited categories where the government or university administration would be able to censor speech just based on the viewpoint that it expresses, I think that takes us back again to the issue of once you open the door to censoring certain views because they're hateful, it puts a whole range of views and ideas at risk that the average person would consider legitimate political advocacy, you know, stuff beyond just the use of a racial slur. And I would say, you know, even that issue gets complicated. Like we've had cases where professors will say a racial slur in class when they're quoting from material, like quoting from a book like To Kill a Mockingbird, or they're quoting from a court case that uses a slur. So they're saying it not in a malicious manner, but for a pedagogically relevant reason. But students are still offended by it. But I just pointed out in this example where it's not even that, even if you narrow it down to that issue, it's not always as simple as people just being straight up racist and malicious towards other people on campus. And yeah, but I think you just need to keep in mind the danger of empowering the authorities to police this type of speech, and the fact that there's no real principled way to draw that boundary between, okay, this is unacceptably offensive speech, but this speech is okay. Whether it's, people chanting from the river to the sea as part of their pro-Palestinian advocacy, or people called activism and protest by Black Lives Matter. Some people call that hateful too, but I think that they should have the right to engage in that. And then when you look around the world, I think you can just find so many examples in countries that don't have our protections where restrictions on hate speech go awry. And it's just the type of thing that's like, like there was a recent case in Russia where a feminist blogger was investigated for hating men in her social media posts. Someone on TikTok was arrested in Indonesia for inciting hate after posting videos mocking Christianity and calling on believers to convert to Islam. So there's just a lot of danger that, and that these types of rules will be enforced in unpredictable and arbitrary and subjective ways. But that doesn't mean that there isn't another way to respond to this type of speech, to use our own voices. And also, I think it's totally legitimate for the university to offer resources to people who are negatively affected by this type of thing. I wouldn't say it's productive to encourage people to have that type of response, but if they are having it and it's really having a significant psychological impact, then I think what a university can do instead of censoring the speaker is offer resources to the person affected.
Hi, how are you doing? I'm John Hofsharon. I'm the interim manager at the Multicultural Center. What resources would you recommend students to utilize to kind of develop and exercise their civil discourse muscle and discussion in vocal cords?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing you can do is join FIRE Student Network to help advance the cause of free speech on campus. I'll give us a little plug here. If you do, it will give you direct access to FIRE staff and resources that can help you promote free speech and exercise your own rights on campus. And then I think there's just a lot of things that students can do to make their own voices heard. You can form student groups that host speaking events and host your own speakers. You can join or start an independent student newspaper. You can organize protests. And we often see disruptions of speaking events by people opposed to the speaker, and we will often say that that's not itself an exercise of free speech if you're violently, for instance, stopping another event, because you're really preventing others from speaking and listening to each other. But you absolutely have the right. If someone else is hosting an event with speakers that you really strongly disagree with, you do have the right to peacefully protest that event. And if you disagree with the speaker, I would encourage you to engage with them if there's a Q&A, like we're doing here. Anyone who disagrees with me, I would encourage to ask questions or challenge me to that effect. So you can engage with speakers during the Q&A, and I think that's such a more productive thing to do than to just try and shut an event down, because often you'll have a speaker come to campus where it's someone you strongly disagree with, and if they're accepting questions, it's like, this is your one opportunity to challenge that person on their beliefs and tell them why they're wrong to their face. And you might not convince them, but a lot of times in these situations, it's also about speaking to the third party observers, to the people in the audience, and being persuasive to people who are watching this exchange. And then again, you can I encourage people to host their own events, bring in a different speaker or someone who will present a different perspective. So there's lots of things I think you can do. And anyone if you or anyone else is interested in more detail on that, you should feel free to reach out to me or to FIRE for more information and resources.
Perfect. Thank you. So I think on behalf of ASEWU and student rights, we're so grateful that you all came out today.